I'm going to share with you the story that changed everything in my life. The night that transformed me from a passive observer into someone I barely recognized. My name is Margaret, and this is about the moment I discovered what I was truly capable of when protecting the people I love. For 28 years, I'd been a high school English teacher in a small town in Ohio. My life was predictable, comfortable even. Wake up at 6, make coffee, grade papers, teach Shakespeare to teenagers who'd rather be anywhere else. My husband Robert had passed away 5 years earlier from a heart attack, leaving me alone in our 2-story house with too many empty rooms and too many memories. My daughter Jessica was my pride and joy, the light that kept me going after Robert died. She'd married a man named Derek Thompson 2 years ago, and I'd stood in that church thinking I was watching her step into happiness. I'd smiled through the entire ceremony, even though something in my gut whispered warnings I chose to ignore. Derek seemed perfect on paper. He worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, made good money, drove a nice car. He was charming at family dinners, always bringing wine and complimenting my cooking. But there were small things, tiny fractures in the facade that I'd noticed but dismissed. The way he'd correct Jessica's stories at gatherings, how his hand would tighten on her arm when she laughed too loudly, the times she'd make excuses for bruises, claiming she was clumsy, that she'd walked into doors or fallen downstairs. I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. After all, what did I know about their marriage? I'd been married to Robert for 30 years, and we'd been partners in every sense. We'd argued, sure, but never with cruelty, never with violence. Maybe I was projecting my own experiences onto their relationship, expecting it to mirror mine. Maybe modern marriages were different, more complicated. So I'd kept quiet, swallowed my concerns, and pretended everything was fine. That changed on a Tuesday night in October. I remember because I'd stayed up late watching an old movie, something black and white that Robert used to love. It was 1:15 in the morning when I heard the pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. Desperate, urgent thuds that sent ice through my veins. I grabbed my robe and rushed downstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I opened that door, the world stopped. Jessica stood there, or rather, she was barely standing. Her face was a canvas of purple and black, one eye swollen completely shut. Her lip was split and bleeding. She wore a thin nightgown despite the October cold, and her bare feet were cut and dirty. But it was her eyes, that one eye that could still open, that destroyed me. It held a terror so profound, so absolute, that I felt something inside me crack open. "Jessica," I whispered. "Oh my God, Jessica!" She collapsed into my arms, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. I pulled her inside, locked the door behind us, and guided her to the couch. My hands were trembling as I touched her face, trying to assess the damage without causing more pain. Every bruise felt like an accusation. Every cut was evidence of my failure to protect her. "Mom," she choked out between sobs. "Mom, I can't go back. I can't. You're not going anywhere," I told her, my voice steady, even though inside I was screaming. "You're staying here. You're safe now." I cleaned her wounds as gently as I could, each swipe of the cotton pad revealing more damage. Bruises ringed her throat like a necklace. Her ribs were tender, possibly cracked. Her wrists bore marks that looked like fingerprints, as if someone had grabbed her and held on too tight. She flinched at every touch, and I had to keep stopping to wipe away my own tears. "Tell me what happened," I said softly, once I'd gotten her cleaned up and wrapped in blankets. "Tell me everything." The story came out in fragments, broken pieces of a nightmare that had been building for months. Derek had always been controlling, she said, but it had gotten worse over the past year. He'd started tracking her phone, questioning every outing with friends, every minute she spent away from home. He'd convinced her to quit her job as a graphic designer, saying he made enough money for both of them, that she should focus on being a good wife. Isolated from her friends and her career, Jessica had become trapped in a house that was really a prison. The physical abuse had started small, a shove here, a grab there. Then it escalated. Tonight, she'd made the mistake of disagreeing with him about something trivial, what show to watch on television. He'd exploded, screaming that she was ungrateful, that he gave her everything and she couldn't even respect his choices. He'd grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the wall. When she'd tried to defend herself, he'd hit her, again and again. "I waited until he passed out drunk," Jessica whispered. "Then I ran. I didn't even grab shoes. I just ran." I held her while she cried, and something fundamental shifted inside me. All my life, I'd been the good girl, the rule follower, the woman who colored inside the lines. I'd taught my students about conflict resolution through literature, about using words instead of violence, about the power of dialogue and understanding. But sitting there with my broken daughter in my arms, I realized that some people don't deserve dialogue. Some people only understand consequences. "We're calling the police," I said. "Right now." Jessica's hand shot out and grabbed my arm. "No," she said, panic flooding her voice. "You don't understand. He has connections. His uncle is a detective in the county sheriff's office. His college roommate is a lawyer. Last time I threatened to leave, he told me he'd make sure I lost everything. He said he'd ruin me, that no one would believe me, that I'd end up looking like the crazy one." I looked at my daughter, at the fear etched into every line of her face, and I made a decision. Maybe it was the wrong decision, maybe it was the right one. I still don't know. But I knew that the system she was describing, the one where he held all the cards and all the power, that wasn't going to protect her. Not really. Not in a way that would keep her safe. "Okay," I said. "We'll do this differently." I spent the rest of that night forming a plan. By the time the sun came up, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I got Jessica settled in the guest room with pain medication and instructions to rest. Then I got dressed, not in my usual teacher clothes, but in dark jeans and a jacket. I pulled my gray hair back into a ponytail. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. I drove to Jessica and Derek's house at 7 in the morning. His car was in the driveway, a sleek black sedan that he polished every weekend. I knew his routine. He'd be getting ready for work, probably nursing a hangover, maybe even convincing himself that last night hadn't been that bad, that Jessica had overreacted, that she'd come crawling back like she always did. I used the spare key Jessica had given me years ago for emergencies. The house was quiet when I entered. I could hear water running upstairs. Derek was in the shower. Perfect. I walked through the house, taking in the details I'd missed on previous visits. The hole in the living room wall that had been covered with a picture frame. The broken lamp in the corner that Jessica had said was an accident. The atmosphere of fear that permeated every room. This wasn't a home. It was a crime scene. I waited in the kitchen, standing by the counter, my hands remarkably steady. When Derek came downstairs 20 minutes later, dressed in his suit and tie, he stopped dead when he saw me. "Margaret," he said, and I could hear the calculation in his voice, already trying to figure out his angle. "What are you doing here? Where's Jessica?" "She's somewhere you'll never hurt her again," I said calmly. His face changed, the charming mask slipped, and underneath I saw something cold and cruel. "She's my wife," he said. "This is none of your business." "She's my daughter," I replied. "That makes it exactly my business." He took a step toward me, trying to use his size to intimidate. He was 6'2", probably 200 pounds. I was 5'5" and had never thrown a punch in my life, but I didn't flinch. "You need to leave," he said, his voice low and threatening. "This is my house. You're trespassing. And you need to understand something very clearly," I said. "I have photographs of every bruise, every cut, every injury on my daughter's body. I have her written statement detailing years of abuse. I have medical records that I'm going to make sure get documented today. And I have copies of everything stored in 3 separate locations with instructions that if anything happens to Jessica or to me, those documents go directly to the press, to the police, and to your employer." His face flushed red. "You're bluffing," he said. "Try me," I said. "Go ahead. Test me. See what happens." We stood there in a standoff, and I could see him weighing his options. He was used to being the one in control, the one who held all the power. But I'd taken that away from him in a single move. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice cold and level. "You're going to agree to a divorce. You're going to give Jessica everything she asks for. You're going to stay away from her, permanently. You're not going to contact her, follow her, or come anywhere near her. And if you do, if you so much as send her a text message, every single piece of evidence I have goes public. Your career ends. Your reputation ends. Everyone you know will see exactly what kind of man you really are." "You can't do this," he said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Watch me," I said. "I've spent 28 years teaching conflict resolution and peaceful solutions, but there's nothing peaceful about what you did to my daughter. And I'm done being polite about it." I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of Jessica's face, the full extent of the damage. I watched him look at it, and I didn't see remorse. I saw annoyance, calculation. He was already thinking about how to spin this, how to make himself the victim. "That's assault," I said. "That's a felony. And with Jessica's testimony and these photos, you'd be looking at prison time. Or you can make this easy. Sign the papers, walk away, and maybe, just maybe, you get to keep your comfortable life. But you don't get to keep Jessica. He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke and his voice was bitter. You think you're protecting her? He said. But you're making a mistake. She needs me. She can't function without me. She'll come running back in a week. That's where you're wrong, I said. She doesn't need you. She never did. You made her think she needed you by breaking her down piece by piece. But that ends now. I'm going to make sure she remembers who she was before you, and she's going to become someone even stronger. I left before he could respond, walking out of that house with my head high and my hands steady. But the moment I got back to my car, I started shaking. Not from fear, but from the realization of what I'd just done. I'd confronted a violent man in his own home. I'd threatened him with consequences that I'd have to follow through on. I'd stepped so far outside my comfort zone that I couldn't even see it anymore. The drive home felt surreal. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I kept replaying the confrontation in my mind, analyzing every word, every gesture, wondering if I'd made things worse. What if Derek decided to retaliate? What if he came after me? What if my plan backfired and Jessica ended up in more danger? But when I got home and saw Jessica sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in Robert's old flannel robe, sipping tea with both hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth, I knew I'd made the right choice. She looked up at me with those haunted eyes, and I sat down across from her. I went to see Derek, I said simply. Her face went pale. Mom? No. What did you do? He's going to be so angry. He's going to come here. He's not going to do anything. I interrupted gently. I made sure of that. I explained everything to her. The photographs I'd taken while she slept, documenting every injury. The detailed notes I'd written about dates, incidents, patterns of behavior she'd shared with me over the months, without realizing she was building a case. The copies I'd made and distributed to my friend Linda, my lawyer cousin Thomas, and my safety deposit box at the bank. The ultimatum I'd given Derek. Jessica listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that broke my heart. I don't know if I'm worth all this trouble, she whispered. Don't you ever say that again, I said fiercely, reaching across the table to take her hands. You are worth everything. You are worth fighting for, protecting, defending. What Derek did to you, that's not love. That's not marriage. That's torture. And I'll be damned if I stand by and let it continue. But what if he doesn't listen? What if he comes after me anyway? Then we'll deal with it, I said. Together. You're not alone anymore, Jessica. You're never going to be alone again. The next weeks were a blur of activity. I hired Patricia Chen, a lawyer who came highly recommended by women at the local domestic violence shelter. Patricia was in her late 40s, sharp as a knife, with short black hair and eyes that seemed to see right through any nonsense. When I first met her in her downtown office, she listened to Jessica's story without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting. This is a strong case, Patricia said when Jessica finished. The injuries are well documented, the pattern of abuse is clear, and the fact that you left immediately after the most recent incident shows you were in fear for your safety. We can get a restraining order filed today. We'll start divorce proceedings immediately. And if Derek violates the restraining order, we'll have him arrested. But his uncle is a detective, Jessica said, her voice small. His friend is a lawyer. They'll help him fight this. Patricia's expression hardened. Let them try, she said. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know every trick abusers and their enablers use, and I'm very good at my job. She was right. Within 48 hours, we had a temporary restraining order. Within a week, Jessica had a full medical examination with a doctor who specialized in documenting abuse injuries. Dr. Sarah Patel was gentle and thorough, photographing every bruise, every cut, every mark. She measured the bruises around Jessica's throat, documented the cracked rib, noted the psychological trauma evident in Jessica's jumpiness and panic responses. This is important evidence, Dr. Patel said, looking at Jessica with compassion. What happened to you is not your fault, and these injuries tell a story that can't be denied in court. Meanwhile, I was working on my own front. I'd created a detailed timeline of Jessica's relationship with Derek, going back to when they first started dating. I interviewed Jessica extensively, asking her to remember everything she could about incidents, arguments, controlling behavior. We filled 3 notebooks with information. I also reached out to Jessica's friends, the ones she'd gradually lost touch with during her marriage. I called her college roommate, her former coworkers, her childhood best friend. I explained what had happened and asked if they'd noticed anything concerning about Derek or changes in Jessica's behavior. The responses were heartbreaking. Every single person said they'd noticed something was wrong but hadn't known how to help. Jessica's college roommate, Amanda, cried on the phone. "I knew something was off," Amanda said. Jessica stopped calling as much. She canceled plans constantly. When we did see each other, she seemed nervous, always checking her phone. One time Derek called during our lunch, and she literally jumped up and said she had to go immediately. I asked if everything was okay, and she just smiled and said Derek worried when she was out too long. "I should have pushed harder. I should have done something." "You couldn't have known," I told her. He isolated her deliberately. "But you can help now. Would you be willing to testify about the changes you noticed in Jessica's behavior?" "Absolutely," Amanda said without hesitation. "Whatever she needs." I collected similar statements from 5 of Jessica's friends. Each one painted a picture of a vibrant, confident young woman who had gradually become a shadow of herself. They described how Jessica had stopped pursuing her art, stopped going to social events, stopped making her own decisions. They talked about seeing her with bruises she'd explained away, hearing her make excuses for Derek's controlling behavior, watching her shrink into herself. This evidence was crucial because it established a pattern. Derek couldn't claim that the injuries were from a single incident, a moment where he lost control. This was systematic abuse, documented over time by multiple witnesses. I also did something else, something I'm not entirely proud of but don't regret. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Rivera. Marcus was a former police officer who now specialized in domestic cases. I asked him to dig into Derek's background, find out if there were any other women who'd had similar experiences. Marcus worked fast. Within 2 weeks, he came back with information that made my blood run cold. Derek had been engaged once before, 7 years ago, to a woman named Rachel Winters. The engagement had ended abruptly, and Rachel had moved to another state. Marcus tracked her down and convinced her to talk. Rachel's story was chillingly similar to Jessica's. Derek had been charming at first, then gradually became controlling and jealous. He'd isolated her from friends and family. He'd started with verbal abuse, then escalated to pushing and grabbing. The final incident had involved him slamming her against a car during an argument. Rachel had broken off the engagement and fled, too scared to press charges because Derek had threatened to ruin her life. "She's willing to provide a statement," Marcus told me. "She said she's felt guilty for years, wondering if Derek hurt someone else because she didn't speak up. She wants to help Jessica." I sat in my living room that night reading Rachel's statement, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Derek wasn't just an abuser. He was a predator. He had a pattern, a method. He chose women he could control, broke them down systematically, and then discarded them when they tried to escape. Jessica was just his latest victim. I showed the information to Patricia, who smiled grimly. "This is excellent," she said. "It shows a pattern of behavior. It demonstrates that Derek's abuse of Jessica wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a long-term pattern. This will be very helpful in court." But Derek wasn't going down without a fight. His lawyer, a slick man named Jeffrey Morrison who wore expensive suits and too much cologne, filed counter motions claiming that Jessica was mentally unstable, that she'd fabricated the abuse allegations to get a better settlement in the divorce. He submitted character references from Derek's colleagues and friends, all testifying to what a great guy Derek was. Morrison also tried to attack my involvement, claiming I was manipulating Jessica, that I had an unhealthy attachment to my daughter and was trying to control her life. He even suggested in court documents that I was the real abuser, that I'd caused Jessica's injuries myself to frame Derek. It was absurd, offensive, and completely predictable. Abusers always try to flip the script, to make themselves the victim. Patricia had warned me this would happen. "Don't let it get to you," Patricia said when I showed her Morrison's latest filing. "This is standard defense strategy in abuse cases. They're desperate, and desperation makes people say ridiculous things. The evidence is on our side. The truth is on our side." She was right, but it still hurt to see my character attacked in legal documents, to have strangers question my motives, my sanity, my relationship with my daughter. I'd spent nearly 3 decades as a respected teacher, a pillar of my community. Now I was being painted as some kind of manipulative villain, but I pushed through. I had to. Jessica needed me to be strong. The restraining order hearing was one of the hardest days of my life. Jessica had to testify about the abuse, describe in detail what Derek had done to her. She had to relive the trauma in front of a judge, lawyers, and a courtroom full of strangers. I sat in the gallery, watching my daughter's hands shake as she spoke, seeing her flinch when Morrison tried to discredit her testimony. Derek sat at the defense table, looking calm and professional in his suit. He'd gotten a haircut. He looked respectable, sympathetic even. If you didn't know better, you'd think he was the victim here. But then Dr. Patel testified, presenting her medical findings with clinical precision. She showed photographs of Jessica's injuries, explained the pattern consistent with strangulation, pointed out evidence of repeated trauma. She testified that Jessica's psychological state was consistent with someone who'd experienced severe domestic violence. Then Amanda testified, describing how she'd watched her friend disappear into an abusive relationship. Rachel testified via video conference, telling her own story of abuse at Derek's hands. The similarities were impossible to ignore. By the end of the hearing, the judge's expression had shifted from neutral to disgusted. He granted a permanent restraining order, requiring Derek to stay at least 500 feet away from Jessica at all times. He also ordered Derek to surrender any firearms and prohibited him from contacting Jessica in any way. Derek's face when the judge read the order was something I'll never forget. Pure rage, barely controlled. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. His hands gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. For a moment, I thought he might explode right there in the courtroom. But he didn't. He stood, nodded to the judge with forced politeness, and walked out. But not before shooting me a look of such pure hatred that I felt it like a physical blow. "Be careful," Patricia warned me after the hearing. "Restraining orders are important, but they're just pieces of paper. They can't physically stop someone determined to cause harm. Make sure you and Jessica are vigilant." I took her warning seriously. I had a security system installed at my house, with cameras covering all the entrances. I changed the locks. I made sure Jessica and I both had pepper spray and knew how to use it. I varied my routine so I wasn't predictable. I told my neighbors what was happening, asked them to call the police if they saw Derek anywhere near my property. My neighbor Carol, a retired nurse who lived 2 doors down, became one of our biggest allies. She'd knock on my door every morning to check in, make sure we were okay. She kept her porch light on all night as an extra deterrent. She even organized a neighborhood watch specifically focused on looking out for Derek's car. "You don't mess with one of our own," Carol told me one afternoon over coffee. "We're watching. If that man comes within a mile of here, we'll know about it." For the first month after the restraining order, nothing happened. Derek seemed to be complying, but then he started testing the boundaries. He'd drive by my house slowly, not stopping but making sure we knew he was there. He'd show up at places he knew Jessica used to frequent, the coffee shop she loved, the art supply store downtown. He never approached her, never technically violated the restraining order, but the message was clear. He was watching. He wasn't giving up. Each incident we reported to the police. Each time they'd document it, talk to Derek, warn him to stay away. But they couldn't arrest him because he technically wasn't violating the order. He was just exercising his right to use public spaces. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. Jessica became increasingly anxious, afraid to leave the house, constantly looking over her shoulder. She'd wake up from nightmares screaming, convinced Derek was in the house. She lost weight, stopped eating regularly, existed in a constant state of hypervigilance. I watched my daughter shrinking back into that terrified shell she'd been in when she first arrived at my door, and I knew I had to do something more. The legal system was doing what it could, but it wasn't enough. Derek was finding ways around every protection we'd put in place. "I'm not strong enough for this," she told me one night, sobbing in my arms. "I can't do this. Maybe I should just give him what he wants. Maybe I should go back. At least then it would be over." "No," I said firmly, holding her tighter. "You're not going back. This is what he wants, to break you down until you give up. But you're stronger than you think. We're going to get through this together." But I was scared too. Scared that Derek would escalate. Scared that the restraining order wouldn't be enough. Scared that I'd lose my daughter, not because she went back to him, but because he'd do something irreversible. That's when I decided to take a more aggressive approach. I started documenting every single time Derek appeared near us. Every drive-by, every sighting, every time we felt we were being followed. I compiled it all into a detailed log with dates, times, locations, and any witnesses. Then I did something that probably wasn't entirely legal. I had Marcus, the private investigator, follow Derek. I wanted to know where he was going, what he was doing, if he was planning something. Marcus was discreet, professional, and expensive, but I didn't care about the cost. I needed to know if my daughter was in immediate danger. What Marcus discovered was disturbing. Derek was indeed following us, but he was being careful about it. He'd park several blocks away and walk. He'd use different vehicles, sometimes borrowing cars from friends. He'd wear different clothes, baseball caps, sunglasses. He was deliberately trying to evade detection while still maintaining surveillance. But Marcus also discovered something else. Derek had started seeing someone new, a woman named Courtney who worked as a receptionist at a dental office. They'd been dating for a few weeks, and from what Marcus could observe, Derek was already exhibiting the same controlling behaviors he'd shown with Jessica. Marcus showed me photographs he'd taken. Derek and Courtney at a restaurant. Derek's hand gripping Courtney's wrist across the table. Derek and Courtney in a parking lot. Derek standing too close, his body language aggressive while Courtney looked scared. Derek and Courtney at her apartment. Derek following her inside even though her body language suggested she wanted him to leave. "This woman is in danger," Marcus said. "The pattern is identical to what happened with Jessica. He's moving fast, probably because he's angry about losing control of Jessica and trying to replace her quickly." "This is important," Patricia said when I showed her Marcus's report. "It demonstrates that Derek is a continued threat, not just to Jessica but to other women. We can use this to argue for stricter enforcement of the restraining order." We filed a motion with the court, presenting all our evidence of Derek's pattern of stalking and his new relationship that was already showing warning signs. We requested that Derek be required to wear a GPS monitoring device, that his restraining order be extended to include staying away from any place Jessica was known to frequent, and that he be required to attend a batterer intervention program. The hearing for this motion was contentious. Morrison argued that we were harassing Derek, that he had a right to move on with his life, that we were using the legal system to continue punishing him for allegations that were never proven criminally. He painted Derek as a victim of a vindictive ex-wife and her overbearing mother. But Patricia was brilliant. She methodically presented our evidence, showing the pattern of stalking, demonstrating Derek's deliberate attempts to evade detection while maintaining surveillance on Jessica. She brought in an expert on domestic violence who testified about the escalation pattern typical in abuse cases, explaining that the period after separation is often the most dangerous for victims. The expert, Dr. Helen Rodriguez, had been studying domestic violence for over 30 years. She'd worked with thousands of victims and had testified in hundreds of cases. Her credentials were impeccable, and her testimony was damning. "What we see here is a textbook case of an abuser who refuses to accept the loss of control over his victim," Dr. Rodriguez said. "The surveillance behavior, the testing of boundaries, the quick replacement with a new partner who he's already controlling, these are all indicators of someone who poses a serious ongoing threat. In my professional opinion, without intervention and strict monitoring, there is a high probability that Derek Thompson will escalate to more serious violence." Then Patricia did something unexpected. She called Courtney, Derek's new girlfriend, as a witness. Courtney was young, maybe 25, with blonde hair and nervous eyes. She testified reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable. Derek stared at her from the defense table, his expression unreadable, but his body language threatening. Under Patricia's gentle questioning, Courtney described her relationship with Derek, how charming he'd been initially, bringing her flowers and taking her to nice restaurants, how quickly he'd become possessive, wanting to know where she was at all times, calling and texting constantly, how he'd started criticizing her appearance, telling her what to wear, getting angry when she wore something he hadn't approved, how he'd started isolating her from her friends, getting upset when she made plans without him, accusing her friends of being bad influences. And then Courtney described the incident from last week. They'd been at her apartment, watching a movie. She'd gotten a text from a male coworker about a work project. Derek had grabbed her phone, read the message, and exploded. He'd accused her of cheating, of lying to him, of disrespecting him. When she'd tried to take her phone back, he'd grabbed her arm and twisted it, hard enough to leave bruises. He'd pushed her against the wall and screamed in her face for over an hour. She'd been too scared to call the police because he'd told her he had connections, that no one would believe her. Patricia showed the court photographs of Courtney's bruised arm. The fingerprint marks were clearly visible, unmistakably similar in pattern to the injuries Jessica had sustained. The courtroom was silent as people stared at the images. "This is who Derek Thompson is," Patricia said, addressing the judge directly. "This is what he does. He finds vulnerable women, charms them, isolates them, and then abuses them. Jessica was brave enough to escape. Rachel Winters was brave enough to escape. But without strict enforcement and supervision, he will continue this pattern with other victims. Courtney is already experiencing the same cycle of abuse that Jessica experienced." The court has a responsibility to protect not just Jessica, but future victims as well. Morrison tried to discredit Courtney, suggesting she was lying, that she'd been coached by Patricia, that the bruises could have come from anywhere. But Courtney had brought her own evidence. Text messages from Derek that were controlling and threatening. Photos she'd taken of other injuries over the past few weeks. A recording she'd made on her phone during one of Derek's tirades, his voice screaming obscenities and threats. The judge listened to 30 seconds of the recording before holding up his hand to stop it. He'd heard enough. The judge granted our motion. Derek was ordered to wear a GPS monitor for 1 full year, to stay away from a 2-mile radius around any location where Jessica was present, and to attend a year-long batterer intervention program with weekly sessions. He was also ordered to have no contact with Courtney. The judge went even further, stating that any violation of these orders would result in immediate arrest and criminal prosecution. Furthermore, the judge said, looking directly at Derek, "I am appalled by the pattern of behavior demonstrated in this courtroom today. Mr. Thompson, you have shown a clear and ongoing threat to multiple women. This court will not tolerate domestic violence, and I am putting you on notice that any future violations will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. You will comply with every aspect of this order, or you will go to jail. Do you understand?" Derek stood, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Yes, Your Honor," he said through gritted teeth. Derek's face when the judge read the order was apoplectic. His hands were shaking. His eyes darted around the courtroom like a trapped animal looking for escape. For a moment, I genuinely thought he might lose control completely. But Morrison grabbed his arm, leaned in close, and whispered something urgent. Derek took a deep breath, nodded once, and sat back down. After the hearing, Courtney approached us in the hallway. She was crying, shaking, looking like she might collapse. "Thank you," she said to Jessica. I didn't know he'd done this to someone else. I thought it was my fault, that I was doing something wrong to make him angry." Jessica hugged her, and I watched 2 women who'd never met before bond over their shared trauma. "It's not your fault," Jessica said. "It was never your fault. He's sick. He's dangerous. And you got out before it got worse." Courtney filed for her own restraining order that day, with Patricia representing her pro bono. Within a week, she'd moved to a different apartment, changed her phone number, and started therapy. She also filed a police report about the assault, adding to Derek's growing legal problems. After that hearing, things changed dramatically. With the GPS monitor, Derek couldn't go near us without being detected immediately. The police could track his every movement. He couldn't stalk us anymore, couldn't drive by the house, couldn't show up at Jessica's favorite places. The psychological warfare stopped because he simply couldn't continue it without immediate consequences. The first week after the GPS monitor was installed, Derek tested it once. He drove to within a 1/4 mile of my house. The police were notified automatically and arrived within minutes. They found him parked on a side street, claimed he was just passing through, that he didn't realize he was near the restricted zone. They gave him a warning and escorted him away. He didn't test the boundaries again. Slowly, gradually, Jessica started to heal. Without the constant threat of Derek's presence, she could begin to relax. She started sleeping through the night, the nightmares becoming less frequent. Her appetite returned, and I watched with relief as she started to look healthy again. She enrolled in online courses to update her graphic design skills, throwing herself into learning new software and techniques. She joined a support group for domestic violence survivors at Hope House, the local shelter. At first, she just attended the meetings, listening to other women share their stories. But gradually, she started opening up, sharing her own experience, finding strength in the solidarity of women who understood exactly what she'd been through. One evening, about 6 months after the GPS monitoring order, Jessica and I were cooking dinner together, something that had become our ritual. We were making Robert's favorite pasta dish, the one with the homemade sauce that took hours to prepare but was worth every minute. Jessica was laughing at something silly I'd said, and the sound filled the kitchen with warmth. It was a genuine laugh, unforced and light, coming from somewhere deep and real. I realized it was the first time I'd heard her laugh like that in years. Not the nervous, forced laugh she'd developed during her marriage, the one that was more about appeasing Derek than expressing joy. This was her real laugh, the one I remembered from when she was a child, pure and unguarded. "Mom," she said suddenly, stopping mid-stir with the wooden spoon still in her hand. "I need to tell you something." I felt a flutter of anxiety. "What is it, honey?" "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," she said, setting down the spoon and turning to face me. "About Derek, about the abuse, about how I ended up in that situation. And I realized something. I need to understand why I stayed so long, why I made excuses for him, why I believed him when he said I was the problem, why I let myself become so small. That's normal, I said gently. Abusers are very good at manipulation. They make you doubt yourself, question your reality. It's not your fault that you stayed. Leaving is the hardest part, and you did that. I know, she said. Intellectually, I know that. Dr. Chen has been helping me understand the psychology of it all, but I need to really understand it, deep down, in my bones. I need to figure out who I was before Derek, who I became during the marriage, and who I want to be now. So I've decided to commit to long-term therapy. Not just a few months, but however long it takes to really work through this. I felt relief wash over me. That's wonderful, I said. That's really brave, Jessica. And there's something else, she continued, her voice getting stronger. I want to start using my experience to help other women. I've been thinking about it for a while now. I want to volunteer at Hope House more seriously, maybe helping with their design work pro bono, updating their website and materials. And eventually, when I'm ready, I want to share my story publicly. I want other women to know they're not alone, that it's possible to survive and rebuild. I hugged her tight, tears streaming down my face. I'm so proud of you, I said. So incredibly proud. Your dad would be too. I think about him a lot, Jessica said quietly. About what he'd say about all this. He always told me I was strong, that I could do anything I set my mind to. I forgot that for a while, but I'm starting to remember. Jessica did exactly what she said she would. She committed to intensive therapy with Dr. Linda Chen, a psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery from intimate partner violence. Dr. Chen had developed a specific treatment protocol for abuse survivors, combining traditional talk therapy with newer techniques like EMDR and somatic experiencing. Twice a week, Jessica would drive to Dr. Chen's office and work through her experiences. She'd come home exhausted, emotionally drained, sometimes barely able to speak, but she kept going. She worked through the shame she felt about staying in the relationship. She examined the ways Derek had gradually eroded her sense of self. She identified the manipulation tactics he'd used and learned to recognize them so she'd never fall victim to them again. One session was particularly difficult. Dr. Chen had Jessica create a timeline of her relationship with Derek, marking every incident of abuse, every time he'd isolated her from friends or family, every time he'd made her question her own reality. When Jessica brought the completed timeline home, it covered 6 feet of poster board, hundreds of incidents, each one a tiny erosion of her autonomy. I didn't realize, she told me that night, staring at the timeline spread across the dining room table. I didn't realize how constant it was, how many times he hurt me. I'd convinced myself it was only a few bad incidents, that most of the time things were okay. But they weren't. Almost every single day there was something. A criticism, a threat, a moment of intimidation. It was relentless. We sat together looking at that timeline, and I felt my heart break all over again. Each mark represented a moment I hadn't known about, hadn't protected her from. But Jessica wasn't showing the timeline to make me feel guilty. She was showing it to help herself understand the full scope of what she'd endured. This is why I felt crazy, she said, running her finger along the poster board. Because it was constant. I was living in a war zone, but I'd convinced myself it was normal, that this was just what marriage was like. But also she started volunteering at Hope House more seriously. At first, she just helped with administrative work, updating their website and designing new brochures and informational materials. The shelter's previous materials had been outdated and poorly designed, created by well-meaning volunteers who lacked professional skills. Jessica transformed them, creating clean, professional materials that conveyed both seriousness and hope. But gradually, she started interacting more directly with the residents. She'd sit in on support group sessions, at first just listening. Then she started sharing her own story, offering support and understanding that only someone who'd been through it could provide. The residents connected with her immediately. Here was someone who'd survived what they were surviving, who'd escaped, and was rebuilding her life. Director Patricia, the woman who ran Hope House, told me that Jessica was a natural. She has this way of making people feel seen, Patricia said. She doesn't judge, doesn't offer empty platitudes. She just listens and shares her truth. The residents trust her. I went with Jessica one evening to see the work she'd done. Hope House was a nondescript building in a residential neighborhood, deliberately unmarked for security reasons. You'd never know from the outside that it was a shelter. Inside, it was warm and welcoming, decorated with donated furniture and artwork created by residents. There were children's toys scattered in a playroom, a communal kitchen where women could cook together, bedrooms that, while small, offered privacy and safety. "Your daughter is remarkable," Director Patricia told me, pulling me aside while Jessica was talking with some residents. "The women here respond to her in a way they don't with most volunteers. She understands them on a level that's hard to explain unless you've been through it. She doesn't pity them. She empowers them. And she gives them hope because she's living proof that you can survive and thrive after abuse." I sat in on one of the support group sessions that night, in the back of the room as an observer. About a dozen women sat in a circle, ranging in age from early 20s to mid-60s. Some had children with them, toddlers playing quietly in the corner while their mothers talked. Others sat alone, arms wrapped around themselves as if holding themselves together. Jessica shared her story with the group. She didn't sugarcoat it or make it easier to hear. She talked about the isolation, the fear, the shame. She talked about how Derek had convinced her she was worthless, that no one else would ever love her. She talked about believing him, about losing herself so completely that she forgot who she'd been before him. She talked about the night she ran to my house, about the terror of escaping, about wondering if she'd have the strength to stay away. She talked about the hard work of recovery, about learning to trust herself again, about the daily effort of reclaiming her identity and rebuilding her life. And then she said something that made everyone in the room, including me, cry. "The hardest part wasn't leaving," Jessica said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "It was accepting that I deserved to leave, that I deserved better, that I deserved love that didn't hurt, respect that wasn't conditional, partnership that wasn't really control disguised as care. I'd been conditioned for so long to believe I was the problem, that I was difficult, demanding, ungrateful, that I was lucky anyone would put up with me. Unlearning that, remembering my worth, understanding that abuse is never the victim's fault, that's the real work of recovery. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, sometimes a really long one, but it's worth it. You're worth it." A young woman in the group, couldn't have been more than 22 with a baby on her hip, spoke up. Her voice was so quiet we had to lean in to hear her. "How did you do it?" she asked. "How did you remember you were worth more? Because right now I can't even imagine feeling that way. I look in the mirror and I don't even recognize myself anymore." Jessica smiled sadly and looked directly at the young woman. "My mom refused to let me forget," she said, glancing at me. "Even when I'd forgotten completely, even when I was convinced I was worthless and deserved everything that happened to me, she saw me clearly. She saw who I really was, not the broken person Derek had created. She fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. She reminded me every single day that I deserved better. She showed me what love really looks like, what it means to protect someone without controlling them." Eventually, slowly, I started to believe her. And once I started believing it, I could start becoming myself again. The young woman was crying now, her baby reaching up to touch her tears. "I don't have anyone like that," she whispered. "My family thinks I should go back to him. They say marriage is forever, that I should try harder, pray more, be more patient. They don't understand." Jessica got up and moved to sit next to her, taking her hand. "Then you have us," Jessica said firmly. "Everyone in this room. We understand. We believe you. And we're telling you the same thing my mom told me. You deserve better. What he's doing to you isn't love. It's abuse. And you're strong enough to get away and stay away. Look at what you've already done. You're here. You left. That takes incredible courage." That night, driving home, Jessica was quiet for a long time. Then she took my hand across the center console of the car. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" I asked, though I thought I knew. "For everything. For saving my life that night. For not giving up on me when I'd given up on myself. For fighting for me even when it was hard and scary. For showing me what real love looks like. What it means to protect someone without controlling them. What it means to believe in someone even when they can't believe in themselves. That's what mothers do," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We protect our children. We fight for them. Always." "I just wish I'd gotten out sooner," Jessica said softly. "I wish I hadn't wasted so many years with him. I wish I'd been stronger." "Don't," I said firmly. "Don't do that to yourself. You got out when you were able to. That's what matters. And those years weren't wasted. They taught you things. Horrible, painful things that no one should have to learn, but things that make you who you are now. Things that let you help those women tonight in a way no one else could." Around that same time, I heard through my network of contacts that Derek was struggling. The GPS monitoring had cost him his job at the pharmaceutical company. His employer had decided that the liability and negative publicity of employing someone with an active restraining order and multiple domestic violence allegations was too high. They'd let him go, citing downsizing, but making it clear the real reason was his legal troubles. Without his high salary, Derek had to move from his nice suburban house to a small apartment in a less desirable part of town. He'd had to sell his car, the one he'd polished every weekend, to pay legal fees. His friends had started to distance themselves as the truth about his behavior became more widely known. Invitations to social events dried up. His golf buddies found excuses to play without him. His carefully constructed life was unraveling. Part of me, the petty part that I'm not proud of, felt satisfaction at his downfall. This was justice, consequences for years of cruelty. He'd hurt my daughter, terrorized her, nearly destroyed her. Watching him face the natural repercussions of his actions felt right. But mostly I just felt sad. Sad for all the damage he'd caused. Sad for Jessica and Rachel and Courtney and whoever else had suffered at his hands. Sad that he'd apparently learned nothing and showed no remorse. Even facing serious consequences, Derek still seemed to view himself as the victim, wronged by vindictive women and an unfair system. I heard from Patricia, my lawyer, that Derek had filed multiple motions trying to have the GPS monitoring removed. He claimed it was preventing him from finding employment, that it was cruel and unusual punishment, that it violated his rights. Each motion was denied. The judge had made it clear that Derek would wear the monitor for the full year as ordered, and that any further attempts to circumvent the court's orders would result in additional sanctions. Derek also filed a complaint against Patricia with the state bar, claiming she'd acted unethically in her representation of Jessica. The complaint was dismissed almost immediately. It was clearly a retaliatory action, another attempt by Derek to punish anyone who'd stood against him. A year and a half after that terrible October night, Jessica's divorce was finally finalized. It had taken longer than we'd hoped, with Derek fighting every single aspect of the settlement. He'd contested the division of assets, tried to claim Jessica owed him money, argued that she should get nothing because she'd abandoned the marriage. But Patricia had systematically demolished every argument, and eventually the judge had run out of patience with Derek's delays and tactics. Jessica got the house they'd shared, though she immediately put it on the market. She didn't want anything that reminded her of that chapter of her life, didn't want to live in a place where so much pain had occurred. She got half of Derek's retirement accounts, enough money to give her financial stability while she rebuilt her career. She got her grandmother's jewelry that Derek had tried to claim as community property. Most importantly, she got her freedom, legally and officially severed from the man who'd nearly destroyed her. We celebrated that night, just the two of us, with champagne and takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. We toasted to new beginnings, to survival, to the future. Jessica was smiling, really smiling, in a way I hadn't seen in years. "I've been thinking about moving," Jessica said as we ate pad thai straight from the containers, starting completely fresh somewhere new. Maybe a bigger city with more opportunities for design work, better resources, more anonymity. "I love you and I'm grateful for everything, but I think I need to be somewhere that doesn't have memories of Derek around every corner." "I think you should do whatever feels right for you," I said, even though the thought of her moving away scared me. "You're ready. You're strong enough to do this on your own." She smiled, that mischievous smile I remembered from her childhood. "I was thinking maybe you could come with me," she said. "We could both start over. Find a place with better weather, more culture, new opportunities for both of us. What do you think?" I was stunned. "You want me to move with you?" "Only if you want to," she said quickly. "I know you have your teaching job here, your friends, your life, the house you shared with Dad. But I thought, maybe we could both use a fresh start. We've been through so much together. Maybe we could start the next chapter together too. But only if you want to. I don't want you to feel obligated." I thought about it seriously. My teaching contract was up for renewal in a few months. I'd been at the same school for 28 years, teaching the same curriculum, seeing the same colleagues. I loved my students, truly, but I was tired. Tired of the small-town gossip, where everyone knew everyone's business. Tired of running into people who knew about Jessica's situation and looked at us with pity, or worse, judgment. Tired of seeing Derek's friends and family around town, at the grocery store, at the post office, pretending they didn't see us. I was tired of living in the house I'd shared with Robert, surrounded by memories of what we'd had and what I'd lost. Maybe it was time for something new. Maybe I needed a fresh start as much as Jessica did. "Let's do it," I said. "Let's start over together." "Where are you thinking?" Jessica's face lit up. She pulled out her laptop and showed me research she'd already done. Cities with thriving creative industries, good public transportation, strong support services for abuse survivors, progressive attitudes. We looked at Portland, Seattle, Austin, Denver. We discussed pros and cons, looked at cost of living, researched neighborhoods. We settled on Portland, Oregon. It was far enough away to feel like a true fresh start, a place where no one knew our story and we could be whoever we wanted to be. The design industry there was robust and growing. There were excellent resources for trauma survivors and ongoing therapy. The culture was progressive and accepting. And honestly, the idea of milder winters and being near the mountains appealed to both of us. I gave notice at my school at the end of the semester. My principal, Tom Henderson, was sad to see me go, but understanding when I explained in vague terms that my family needed a fresh start. Several of my colleagues threw me a retirement party, though I insisted it wasn't retirement, just a new chapter. Some of my former students came, now adults themselves with careers and families of their own. One former student, Brian Martinez, pulled me aside at the party. "Mrs. Anderson," he said, "I need to tell you something. When I was in your class 15 years ago, my mom was in an abusive relationship with my stepdad. I saw things at home that no kid should see. Your classroom was the only place I felt safe. You never knew what was happening, but the way you treated us, the way you made us feel valued and heard, it kept me going. Eventually, my mom left him, and we got out. But I've always wanted to thank you for being that safe place when I needed it most." I hugged him, crying. "I didn't know, Brian. I wish I'd known. I could have helped more. You helped by being you," he said. "By creating a space where I felt human. That was enough. Conversations like that reminded me why I'd become a teacher in the first place. And they gave me hope that even when I hadn't known the full story, even when I'd felt helpless, maybe I'd still made some small difference." Jessica and I spent the next months planning our move with excitement and hope. We spent a week in Portland looking at apartments, exploring neighborhoods, getting a feel for the city. We found a perfect 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet area of Northeast Portland, in a building that felt safe and welcoming. It had hardwood floors that glowed golden in the afternoon light, big windows that let in the Oregon gray sky, and a small balcony where we could see Mount Hood on clear days. We moved in September, when the trees were just starting to hint at autumn colors. We furnished the apartment slowly and deliberately, choosing each piece with care. Nothing from Jessica's marriage, nothing that carried bad memories. Every item was new or vintage but ours, chosen because we loved it, not because it was on sale or practical or what someone else thought we should have. Jessica threw herself into rebuilding her career with an energy and focus I hadn't seen in years. She started taking on freelance design projects, building a portfolio that showcased her skills and style. She networked relentlessly, attending design meetups and industry events, connecting with other creatives in the city. She updated her skills with online courses in the latest design software and techniques. Within 6 months of our move, Jessica landed a full-time position at a progressive design firm called Impact Creative. The company specialized in work for nonprofit organizations, advocacy groups, and social justice causes. Her boss, a woman named Sophia Chen, who had founded the firm 10 years earlier, valued Jessica's perspective and lived experience. "We're not just designing logos and websites here," Sophia told me when I met her at a company event. "We're helping organizations that do real good in the world. Organizations fighting domestic violence, supporting refugees, advocating for environmental justice, providing healthcare to underserved communities." And Jessica's lived experience with domestic violence gives her unique insight into designing materials for shelters, advocacy groups, crisis hotlines. She understands the audience in a way most designers never could. She knows what survivors need to see, what messages resonate, what images feel safe versus threatening. She's an incredible asset to our team. I found my own path forward too. I didn't return to traditional teaching, but I couldn't stay away from education entirely. I started volunteering at a literacy nonprofit called Portland Reads, helping adults learn to read and write. It was humbling work, teaching people in their 40s and 50s and 60s the skills most of us take for granted. My students were motivated in ways my high school students had rarely been. They understood exactly what they were missing by lacking literacy, how it limited their job prospects and daily lives. They were grateful for every lesson, every small step forward. And they taught me as much as I taught them, about resilience and determination, and the courage it takes to admit you need help. I also started writing. I'd always loved literature but had never tried creating it myself. Robert used to tell me I should write, that I had stories worth telling, but I'd always been too busy with teaching and grading and the daily demands of life. Now, with more time and a new perspective born from everything we'd been through, I began writing essays about my experience. I wrote about domestic violence from a mother's perspective, about the warning signs I'd missed and the ones I'd seen but dismissed, about the failures of the system to adequately protect victims, about what it means to stand up for someone you love even when it's terrifying, about the transformation that happens when you're pushed to your absolute limits and discover you're stronger than you ever imagined. One of my essays was accepted for publication in a regional magazine called Cascadia Monthly. It was called When Being Nice Isn't Enough, a mother's perspective on protecting her daughter from abuse. I was nervous about publishing it, about putting our story out there for strangers to judge and critique. But Jessica encouraged me, said it was important, that it might help other mothers recognize what I hadn't seen until almost too late. The response to that essay was overwhelming. I received dozens of emails from other mothers, from survivors, from people working in the domestic violence field. Many shared their own stories of abuse, either their own or their daughters. Many thanked me for speaking out, for articulating things they'd felt but couldn't express. Some criticized me for not calling the police immediately, for taking matters into my own hands, for potentially putting Jessica in more danger with my confrontation of Derek. I understood all the perspectives, even the critical ones. What I'd done was risky and possibly reckless, but it had worked. Jessica was safe. And I'd learned that sometimes protecting someone you love means taking risks, means doing things that scare you, means acting even when you're not sure it's the right move because doing nothing definitely isn't the right move. That essay led to speaking engagements. I started being invited to talk at community centers, libraries, universities, domestic violence organizations throughout Oregon, and eventually in other states. I'd stand in front of rooms full of people ranging from a dozen to a few hundred and tell our story, our real story, without sugarcoating the difficult parts or pretending I'd handled everything perfectly. I emphasized the warning signs I'd missed, the gradual isolation of Jessica from her friends, the way Derek had convinced her to quit her job, the increasingly frequent accidents that left bruises, the changes in her personality, how she became quieter, more anxious, less herself. I wanted other parents to recognize these patterns before it was too late. I talked about the ways the system had failed us, how Jessica had been too scared to call the police because of Derek's connections, how restraining orders, while important, are just pieces of paper that can't physically stop a determined abuser, how victims often face as much scrutiny as perpetrators, their credibility questioned, their motives examined, how the legal process is slow and expensive and traumatizing, while abusers often have more resources and connections to navigate it. Most importantly, I talked about the importance of believing victims and acting decisively to protect them, about creating safe spaces where people can disclose abuse without fear of judgment, about the courage it takes to leave and the support survivors need to stay away, about the long, difficult process of healing and rebuilding that continues long after the immediate crisis has passed. Jessica came to one of my talks about a year after we moved to Portland. She sat in the back row of a community center auditorium, and I almost didn't see her at first. But halfway through my presentation, our eyes met, and she smiled at me with such pride and love that I had to pause for a moment to collect myself. Afterwards, she came up and hugged me tight, not caring that there were strangers around. "You're helping people," she whispered. "All of this, everything we went through, you're using it to help other people avoid the same pain. Dad would be so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. We're helping people together," I corrected her. "You with your work at Impact Creative and your volunteering. Me with my writing and speaking. We're turning our pain into purpose. That's how we honor what we survived." We settled into our new life in Portland with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. We explored the city together, finding favorite coffee shops where the baristas learned our orders, hiking trails that challenged us physically and cleared our minds, bookstores where we could lose hours browsing and reading. We made new friends, both separately and together, people who knew us as we were now, rather than through the lens of our trauma. We continued our rituals from Ohio, but adapted them to our new life. Friday night movies became Friday night explorations of Portland's independent cinema scene. Sunday morning pancakes evolved into trying new brunch spots around the city. We added new traditions, too. Tuesday evening walks along the Willamette River. Saturday morning trips to the farmer's market. Monthly drives out to the coast to watch the ocean and breathe the salt air. We went to therapy, both separately and occasionally together, continuing the work of healing and processing. Jessica saw Dr. Chen regularly, working through layers of trauma and rebuilding her sense of self. I started seeing a therapist too, Dr. James Wu, who specialized in helping people process vicarious trauma, the kind of trauma you experience from watching someone you love suffer. Dr. Wu helped me work through my guilt about not recognizing the abuse sooner, about not acting faster, about all the ways I felt I'd failed Jessica. He helped me understand that I'd done the best I could with the information and understanding I had at the time. That recognizing and naming abuse, especially when it's happening to someone close to you, is incredibly difficult. That abusers are skilled at hiding their behavior and manipulating perceptions. That I couldn't have saved Jessica until she was ready to be saved. Jessica started dating again after we'd been in Portland for about a year. It was terrifying for both of us. What if she chose another abuser? What if the trauma had damaged her ability to recognize healthy relationships? What if she got hurt again? But Jessica was careful and thoughtful. She'd learned to trust her instincts, to recognize red flags, to move slowly and observe patterns over time rather than getting swept up in initial charm. She went out with a few different people, casually, learning what she wanted and didn't want in a partner. Then she met Michael Chen at a volunteer event for an animal shelter. He was a software engineer who devoted his weekends to helping rescue dogs find homes. He was quiet, thoughtful, with kind eyes and an easy laugh. He didn't push Jessica for personal information or try to move the relationship faster than she was comfortable with. He respected her boundaries without her having to explain or defend them. The first time Jessica brought Michael to dinner at our apartment, I watched him with the vigilance of a hawk watching a potential predator near her nest. I couldn't help it. I was looking for warning signs, red flags, any indication that he might be another Derek? Any sign of possessiveness, controlling behavior, disrespect, anything that might suggest he could hurt my daughter? But all I saw was a gentle man who clearly cared about Jessica, who listened attentively when she spoke, who asked thoughtful questions, who treated her as an equal partner in the conversation. He helped clear the table without being asked. He thanked me genuinely for dinner. He didn't monopolize the conversation or try to be the center of attention. He seemed content to simply be present, to enjoy Jessica's company, to get to know me without pretense or performance. After dinner, while Jessica was in the kitchen preparing dessert, Michael turned to me with a serious expression. "Mrs. Anderson," he said quietly, "I know Jessica's been through something difficult in her past. She hasn't told me all the details, and I'm not asking her to. I respect that she'll share what she's comfortable sharing when she's ready. But I want you to know something. I would never hurt her. Not emotionally, not physically, not in any way. I care about her deeply. She's one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. And if you ever see me doing anything that concerns you, anything at all that seems like I'm not treating her with the respect and kindness she deserves, I hope you'll tell me. I hope you'll hold me accountable." I looked at this young man, at the sincerity in his eyes, at the open, honest expression on his face, and I felt some of the tension I'd been carrying since he walked through the door ease slightly. "Thank you for saying that," I said carefully. "It means a lot. Jessica's been through more than anyone should have to endure. She deserves someone who treats her well, who respects her autonomy, who makes her feel safe and valued. That's exactly what I want to be for her," Michael said. "I can't promise I'll be perfect. Nobody is. But I promise I'll always try to do right by her, to communicate honestly, to handle conflicts with respect. And I promise that if I ever make her feel unsafe or disrespected, she has every right to walk away. And I'll respect that decision completely." Jessica and Michael have been together for over a year now. They're taking things slow, which I deeply appreciate. There's no talk of moving in together or getting engaged, no rushing toward traditional relationship milestones. Just two people genuinely enjoying each other's company, building trust slowly, creating something healthy and sustainable. Sometimes I see them together, laughing at a shared joke or working side by side on a project, and my heart aches for what Jessica lost, for the years Derek stole from her, for the version of her 20s she should have had. But mostly I feel overwhelming gratitude that she survived, that she has the chance now to experience what real love looks like, what a healthy partnership feels like, what it means to be with someone who enhances your life rather than diminishing it. As for Derek, I rarely think about him anymore. He's become irrelevant to our new lives, a figure from a painful past that we've moved beyond. I heard through mutual acquaintances back in Ohio that he moved to Tennessee after his GPS monitoring period ended, that he'd found work in a different industry, selling insurance or something similar. The report suggested he'd stayed out of legal trouble, at least as far as anyone knew. I hope, genuinely, that he's gotten help. That he's been through real therapy and batterer intervention and has genuinely changed his behavior. But I'm not naive enough to believe it's likely. Most abusers don't change. Not really. They might learn to hide their behavior better, to choose victims with fewer resources to fight back, to be more careful about leaving evidence. But the fundamental need for control, the belief that they're entitled to dominate their partners, that rarely changes without intensive intervention and genuine desire to transform. What I do know with absolute certainty is that we survived. Jessica and I both emerged from that nightmare not just intact but stronger, wiser, more resilient than we'd been before. We learned things about ourselves we never would have discovered in easier circumstances. We forged a bond that can't be broken by distance or time or future challenges. We found purpose in our pain, using our experience to help others navigate similar situations and escape similar nightmares. It's been 5 years now since that October night when everything changed. 5 years since Jessica collapsed on my doorstep, broken and terrified and desperate. 5 years since I discovered what I was truly capable of when someone I love was in mortal danger. Looking back at the woman I was before that night, I can barely recognize her. She was softer, more trusting, more naive. She believed that good things happened to good people, that systems existed to protect the vulnerable, that love and kindness and following the rules would keep her loved ones safe. She kept her head down, avoided conflict, believed that being nice was always the right approach. I'm not that woman anymore. I learned that sometimes being nice isn't enough. Sometimes you have to be fierce, formidable, even frightening. Sometimes you have to step so far outside your comfort zone that you can't even see it anymore. Sometimes protecting someone means getting your hands dirty, means making threats you're prepared to follow through on, means becoming someone you barely recognize when you look in the mirror. But I also learned about resilience, about the incredible capacity of the human spirit to heal and grow and transform. I've watched Jessica evolve from a terrified victim to a strong, confident woman who's using her experience to help others. I've seen her reclaim her life, her career, her sense of self. I've witnessed her learn to trust again, to love again, to believe in her own worth and demand that others recognize it too. And I've transformed as well. I'm not the passive, predictable high school teacher I used to be, content with my small, comfortable life. I'm an advocate now, a speaker, a writer. I'm someone who stands up for what's right even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular. I'm someone who believes victims without hesitation, who acts decisively when action is needed, who refuses to look the other way when people are hurting. My story, our story, isn't one of simple heroism. I didn't save the day and ride off into the sunset with credits rolling. What I did was messy and complicated and probably legally questionable. I took risks that could have backfired catastrophically. I made decisions that some people would consider reckless or inappropriate, but they were also necessary, and they worked. Derek never bothered Jessica again. She got free. She got her life back. And that's what matters most. I've learned that being a good mother, a good person, sometimes means being willing to be the villain in someone else's story. Derek probably tells anyone who'll listen that I'm a crazy, controlling mother-in-law who ruined his marriage through manipulation and lies. His family might believe I overstepped my bounds, that I interfered where I shouldn't have, that I turned Jessica against a man who loved her, and I'm completely okay with that. Let them think what they want. I know what I saw. I know what he did. And I know what I had to do to protect my daughter. There's a moment that stays with me, crystal clear, from a few months after the divorce was finalized. Jessica and I were having coffee on the small balcony of our Portland apartment, watching the sunrise paint Mount Hood in shades of pink and gold. It was one of those perfect Oregon mornings when the air is crisp and clean and full of possibility. She was quieter than usual, thoughtful, staring into her coffee cup as if it held answers to questions she hadn't asked yet. Then she turned to me, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Mom," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I need to tell you something I've never said properly. That night, when I ran to your house, I wasn't sure I was going to survive. I don't just mean physically, though. I was genuinely scared Derek might kill me eventually. I mean emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. I felt like I was disappearing, like he'd erased everything I used to be. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be strong, to be myself, to have opinions and dreams and autonomy. I thought maybe I deserved what was happening because I'd been stupid enough to marry him, weak enough to stay as long as I did." She paused, and the tears spilled over, running down her cheeks in silent streams. I reached for her hand and held it tight. "But then I saw what you did," she continued, her voice breaking. How you fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. How you didn't let him win. How you risked everything, your safety, your reputation, your comfortable life, to protect me. And it reminded me that I was worth fighting for, that I wasn't weak or stupid or deserving of abuse. You showed me what real love looks like, what real strength looks like. Not the fake strength of domination and control, but the real strength of standing up for someone even when you're terrified, of doing the right thing even when it's hard and scary and might blow up in your face. You gave me back to myself, Mom. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. We sat there crying together, holding hands, and I realized something profound. This journey hadn't just been about protecting Jessica from Derek. It had been about both of us discovering what we were capable of when pushed to our absolute limits. It had been about learning that sometimes love means being fierce instead of gentle, that sometimes kindness requires courage, that sometimes the right thing feels completely wrong, but you do it anyway because the alternative is unthinkable. I think about that October night often, about the woman I used to be before I opened that door and saw my daughter broken and bleeding. I was softer then, more trusting, more naive. I believed the world was fundamentally fair, that good people were rewarded and bad people faced consequences, that systems existed to protect the vulnerable. I've learned that the world is far more complicated than that. There are people who abuse kindness, who see compassion as weakness, who will take everything they can until someone forcibly stops them. But I've also learned about the incredible resilience of the human spirit, the capacity we all have to heal and grow and become more than we were. I've watched my daughter rebuild herself from nothing, from less than nothing, from the ashes of who Derek tried to destroy. I've seen her reclaim her life, her identity, her future. I've witnessed her transformation from victim to survivor, to thriver to advocate. And I've learned that I'm capable of things I never imagined, that love can make you brave, that protecting family is worth any price. Teaching literature for nearly 3 decades, I'd always believed that stories had the power to change us, to teach us about ourselves and others, to show us different possibilities for living. But I never expected to live through a story that would change me so completely, so fundamentally, that I'd emerge as a different person. I never expected to be tested in such a profound way, and I never expected to discover such reserves of strength and determination within myself. Sometimes, late at night when sleep won't come and the Portland rain drums steadily on the roof, I think about that moment in Derek's kitchen, the standoff, the threats I made with a voice that didn't shake even though my insides were liquid terror. The line I crossed from passive observer to active protector. I still don't know if what I did was right in some objective, moral sense. Probably some ethics committee somewhere would say I handled it all wrong, that I should have trusted the system, called the police, let professionals handle it. But I know it was necessary. I know that it worked. I know that Jessica is alive and thriving because I acted, and I know without any doubt that I'd do it all again, exactly the same way, without hesitation. That's what mothers do when their children are in danger. We become whatever we need to become. We do whatever we need to do, and we live with the consequences of those choices because protecting our children is worth any cost. That's what Derek will never forget. Not the specific threats I made, though I'm sure those still echo in his mind, but what they represented. The complete and total loss of control. The realization that his actions had consequences he couldn't charm or manipulate or threaten his way out of. The understanding that there were people who would stand up to him, who would protect his victims with a ferocity that matched or exceeded his own capacity for cruelty, who would make absolutely certain he faced accountability for what he'd done. And that's what I want other people, other parents, other friends, other witnesses to take from my story. Not that everyone should confront their abusers the way I confronted Derek, because that's not always safe or advisable and every situation is different, but that we all have a responsibility to protect the vulnerable, to believe victims when they find the courage to share their stories, to act when we see abuse, even when it's uncomfortable, even when we're not sure exactly what to do, even when it means putting ourselves at risk, to be willing to step outside our comfort zones, to take risks, to stand up even when our voices shake and our hands tremble. Because at the end of the day, that's what love requires sometimes. Not the soft, gentle, romantic love of poetry and greeting cards, but the fierce, protective, warrior love that says, I will move heaven and earth and everything in between to keep you safe. I will face down anyone who tries to hurt you. I will sacrifice my comfort, my reputation, my peace of mind, my safe, predictable life to ensure you survive and thrive and reclaim everything that was stolen from you. That's the love Robert and I built our 30-year marriage on. the foundation we gave to Jessica from the moment she was born. That's the love I've tried to model and embody throughout her life. And that's the love I hope she'll carry forward into her own relationships, knowing she deserves nothing less, accepting nothing less, demanding nothing less from anyone who claims to care about her. 5 years later, sitting in my Portland apartment with Jessica laughing in the next room as she talks on the phone with Michael, I think about how far we've come. The journey from that terrible October night to this peaceful Tuesday evening has been long and difficult and painful, but we made it. We survived. We thrived. We transformed our pain into purpose, our trauma into advocacy, our suffering into a fierce commitment to helping others escape similar nightmares. Jessica is thriving in ways I couldn't have imagined 5 years ago. She has a career she loves, working with organizations that align with her values. She has genuine friendships built on mutual respect and support. She has a healthy relationship with someone who treats her well. She has therapy and support systems and coping mechanisms for the hard days when trauma resurfaces. She has her autonomy, her voice, her sense of self fully restored, and probably stronger than it ever was before. I'm at peace in ways I haven't been since Robert died, maybe even before that. I have purpose and meaning beyond just going through the motions of daily life. I'm making a difference, helping people, using everything I learned from our nightmare to prevent others from experiencing similar pain. I have a relationship with my daughter that's deeper and more honest than many parent-child relationships ever become. I know who I am now, what I'm capable of, what I stand for, and what I'll never tolerate. The past will always be with us. Trauma doesn't just disappear, doesn't get neatly resolved and filed away. It shapes us, changes us, becomes part of our story, whether we want it to or not. There are still hard days when Jessica wakes up from nightmares or sees someone who reminds her of Derek and has to work through a panic response. There are still moments when I see a news story about domestic violence and feel that familiar rage and helplessness rising in my chest. But the past doesn't define us anymore. We've taken that pain and transformed it, integrated it into who we are without letting it control who we become. We've built lives that honor what we survived while reaching toward futures full of possibility and hope. And Derek? He's a memory now, a cautionary tale, a reminder of what can happen when you mistake control for love and cruelty for strength. Whatever he's doing, wherever he is, however his life has unfolded in the years since we escaped, he carries one absolute certainty. He didn't win. His victim got away. There were consequences for his actions that he couldn't avoid or minimize or spin into his favor. That's what he'll never forget. That's what will always gnaw at him. The knowledge that he lost, that his power wasn't absolute, that there were people stronger than him who refused to let him destroy someone they loved. And that knowledge, that certainty that he didn't win and never will, that's enough for me. That's justice in its own way. Not perfect, not what the legal system promises, but real and lasting and sufficient. That's my story. That's our story. And if it helps even one person recognize abuse earlier, believe a victim more readily, act more decisively to protect someone in danger, then every difficult moment, every risk, every sacrifice was worth it.